Once upon a time, Jimmy Olsen was right at the centre of Superman's weirdest adventures. He was a plucky redhead who in one issue would turn into a giant turtle, the next go on adventures through time and space, and then the one after that get married to an ape. He was Superman's pal, the face of bonkers sci-fi storytelling that acted as a gateway for readers. But when Superman the Animated Series came around, Jimmy was stripped of all that. No transformations, no super serums, no time travelling, and he stayed single. Instead, he became a guy, a background extra with a camera and a haircut that was out of date before the first episode even aired. And yet, that change says a lot about how this show saw Superman's world and about what it lost in the process. But before I get to that, let's talk about Jimmy Olsen's comic book origins. Jimmy Olsen technically made his first appearance in Action Comics number 6. I say technically because that's when he was seen and he wasn't named. He was one of the members of staff at the Daily Star newspaper, as it was originally called before being renamed the Daily Planet, alongside Lois Lane and Clark Kent, but he wasn't all that significant. He was only given a name in the very popular Adventures of Superman radio show, which was responsible for fleshing out Superman's supporting cast. After all, the downside of audio-based media is that listeners can't see any of the events that are taking place. So the writers of that show leaned into the dynamics between the Daily Planet staff to keep them engaged. Shortly after his radio debut, Jimmy was officially named in the comics, but he wasn't used all that much in the more grounded social commentary stories of the 1940s. However, after those kinds of stories were branded as socialist propaganda designed to poison the minds of America's youth, the Superman writers took a hard pivot into the realm of absurd science fiction, and Jimmy Olsen became the poster boy for this era. Jimmy became the youthful everyman who was dragged into Superman's weird and exciting world, and he acted as a proxy for the audience. Young readers could imagine themselves as Superman's friend, going through these bizarre adventures. As Superman's pal, his official title, Jimmy Olsen experienced some incredible things. He transformed into a gigantic fire-breathing turtle akin to Godzilla. He became a superhero in his own right after drinking a special formula that turned him into Elastic Lad. He took a different formula to make him grow in size to wrestle Titano the Super Ape. And in one story that genuinely makes me laugh to this day, Jimmy was forced to marry an ape. Did I already mention that one? I think I did. That's not to say that all of his adventures were fantastical though. When Clark Kent was mistakenly believed to have been killed in a bottle factory explosion, Superman decided to retire his secret identity and become Superman 24/7. One thing he hadn't thought about was the fact that he still needed a place to stay, so he moved in with Jimmy. However, the unwanted attention of being Superman's roommate made things too difficult for Jimmy, who had to navigate crowds of adoring fans, cheering and hollering at all hours of the night and day, as well as attacks from wrong-uns that wanted to end the Man of Steel. In the 1970s, legendary writer and artist Jack Kirby turned heads when he left Marvel Comics to work at DC. Kirby was the co-creator of some of the most famous comic book characters of all time: Captain America, the Incredible Hulk, the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, and so on. So it really was a big deal that he decided to jump ship. When asked what series he wanted to work on, he insisted that he be assigned to a series that didn't have a steady creative team because he didn't want to take work from anybody. He also wanted to work on a less popular book to improve its sales. The book he was given was Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. While Kirby kept some of the same zany Silver Age energy, with Jimmy becoming a caveman in one story, he also used the series to launch his Fourth World characters and introduce Darkseid. This is arguably the strongest era of Jimmy Olsen stories, but even with Kirby's bold ideas, the series was eventually cancelled, relegating Jimmy to the pages of other Superman comics, and Kirby went on to create new characters like Etrigan the Demon and Kamandi, the last boy on Earth. In the 1980s, as DC prepared to scrap their existing continuity via Crisis on Infinite Earths, writer Alan Moore penned what was intended to be the final Superman story, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. Now, when I say it was the final Superman story, I mean it was intended to cap off the pre-Crisis Superman story before the big continuity reset, and this story gave Jimmy Olsen a brutal ending. When Superman's secret identity was exposed, all of his villains united to try and end him once and for all. After the Daily Planet was attacked by a legion of Metallos, Superman took his friends to his Fortress of Solitude to try and defend them, but it wasn't enough. In an effort to help Superman, Jimmy Olsen drank the formula that gave him elastic superpowers and faced their enemies. He gave it his all, but Brainiac murdered him. His death, along with Krypto the Superdog, was symbolic of the end of the classic era of Superman stories, and the brutality of it all set the tone for the new continuity. After Crisis, Superman's world was streamlined and more grounded. Superman was the only Kryptonian. Lex Luthor was reimagined as a corporate fat cat rather than a mad scientist, and Jimmy Olsen was a regular photographer at the Daily Planet. His role was to document the adventures, not be an active participant in them most of the time. And this is the take that the Superman the Animated Series writers went with too. Sure, there were nods to his Silver Age stories, like that time Mr. Mxyzptlk briefly turned Jimmy into a turtle, but for the most part Jimmy's sole role was to take pictures to go along with Lois Lane's articles. It's also worth noting that while Jimmy Olsen had been instrumental in launching Kirby's Fourth World characters in the comics, he was decoupled from them when they made their appearances in STAS. No, instead Jimmy was a regular guy with regular problems. He's ambitious and creative. He wants to be taken seriously as a photojournalist. It's just the world sees him as a dorky kid. Part of the reason that I react negatively towards this version of Jimmy Olsen is his design, specifically his very dated hairstyle. In a show where pretty much all of the other characters look timeless, Jimmy stands out like a sore thumb, and I think that may have been intentional. In a way, the design informs us a lot about him. Aside from his awkward hairstyle, he wears baggy clothes, probably intended to reflect the fashion of the mid-90s, but it also looks like he hasn't quite grown into his body yet, really underscoring that sense that he hadn't grown up. While he saw his working relationship with Lois as a partnership, to her he was more of a useful tool. A great example of this dynamic is when Clark Kent first started at the Daily Planet. Lois used Jimmy to distract him, while she got a head start on covering the LexCorp event that they had both been assigned to. Jimmy was completely unaware of what Lois had done. That's not to say that Jimmy was entirely oblivious and useless. Well, not always. When Superman had been kidnapped by the Parasite, it was Jimmy that noticed that Parasite always flew in the direction of his old workplace, Star Labs, and rescued Superman. Jimmy may have overestimated his abilities, lying in wait for the Parasite as if he could do anything to harm him, but his heart was in the right place. In terms of his writing, Jimmy didn't really have all that big of an impact. One scene that sticks out in my memory is the episode where there's smoke. Clark and Jimmy are assigned with covering an exhibition at a sailing club, and Jimmy takes a picture of the debuting villain Volcana for his personal collection. The idea of Jimmy using his day job to build his personal spank bank really repulses me, so I was glad to see that, while Volcana played into it, she used the opportunity to erase his film. Really though, Jimmy's biggest role came in the episode Superman's Pal, an episode that producer Bruce Timm includes on his list of worst episodes across the entire DCAU, and he has publicly apologised for it. While it's nowhere near as good as most episodes of STAS, I don't think it's something to be ashamed of, frankly. It is let down by wonky animation and slightly off character models, but overall it's an okay episode. The plot involves a spontaneous interview with Jimmy Olsen, being edited by Angela Chen to make it seem like he was Superman's best friend. Jimmy didn't go as far as saying that, but once the interview was broadcast, it was too late to do anything about it. While Jimmy is embarrassed and upset with Angela for twisting his words, he does enjoy some of the perks, like the attention he gets from one of the interns, Tina, who had earlier dismissed him as a dork. But now she thought he was Superman's best friend, she was willing to go on a date with him. As Superman's friend, Jimmy found it easy to get a table at a swanky restaurant. People treated him with respect because of his association with Superman. However, the less savoury types figured they could get revenge on Superman by beating him up. When Superman intervened to save Jimmy and Tina, it cemented the view that Jimmy really was Superman's best friend, and suddenly everyone who wanted to get in touch with Superman started going through Jimmy, which was exhausting. To make matters worse, Tina, it turns out, was working with Metallo, and used Jimmy to lure Superman into a death trap. Tina's motivations are pretty shallow. She points to her piercings and jewellery and says that she likes metal, making Metallo the ideal man for her. But I suppose that's not all that important in the long run. While Metallo's kryptonite heart made him especially deadly to Superman, Jimmy was able to defeat him by dousing him in corrosive battery acid, which burned out Metallo's insides. A boring, everyday object saved the day. Sort of like Jimmy. While Jimmy was work friends with Clark, really, Superman hadn't had all too many interactions with him. But now that the world believed them to be best friends, Superman gave Jimmy a watch that could emit a high-pitched signal that Superman would be able to hear if he was in trouble. During Justice League Unlimited, Huntress tied up Jimmy and used the signal watch to get Superman to help her rescue the Question from Cadmus. Ultimately, without the Silver Age shenanigans, Jimmy Olsen was little more than a background character that played a small part in the overall story of Superman the Animated Series. Jimmy Olsen used to be Superman's sidekick in all but name. He was Superman's pal in bold letters. But in Superman the Animated Series, he was just another face in the newsroom. The wild energy that once made Jimmy such a vibrant, unpredictable force was exchanged for a safer, smaller role. Sure, he had his moments, a dash of heroism here, a flash of comic relief there, but he never really mattered the way he once did. He went from Superman's pal to Superman's acquaintance. And maybe that's the point. In a show grounded in realism, the wild optimism of Jimmy Olsen doesn't quite fit. The show gave us a Man of Steel with depth, dignity, and emotional nuance. But in the same process, it shed most of the weird, joyful, reckless spirit that once defined his world. I'm not saying that this is a bad thing. In fact, I think that overall I prefer this approach. But you cannot deny that Jimmy was the casualty of that trade. And while the show reimagined many characters to great effect, Jimmy Olsen was left behind. Not because he didn't matter, but because he just didn't fit in anymore. Okay, that's it for this week's essay. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really enjoyed the video and have the means, please consider making use of the thanks button to send a buck or two my way, because every little helps. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essay, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, custom emojis, and an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my people. And special thanks to my channel members. Everyone who was a member at the time of this video's creation is listed on the screen right now. If you want to see your name amongst all these wonderful people, join the channel now. Next time. I'll be back on Monday to commemorate the 10th anniversary of Alan Burnett and Bruce Timm's attempt at redefining the Justice League with their horror-tinged film Justice League Gods and Monsters. And next Friday I want to talk about an absurd Silver Age character who went through a dramatic reinvention in Batman Beyond. Yes, it's time to talk about Batman's best friend, Ace. Hope to see you then.